The morning started like any other Tuesday at the United Nations building in New York. People hurried to their offices with coffee cups in hand, talking about the weather and their weekend plans. Nobody expected that this day would change everything for the human race. At exactly 10 o'clock, the main assembly hall filled with representatives from every country on Earth. President Helen Carter sat in the front row, checking her phone for the latest news. Next to her, Secretary of Defense Paul Martinez was reading through a stack of papers about military budgets. Secretary of State Linda Thompson was chatting quietly with the ambassador from France about trade agreements. Then the doors opened, and everything changed. The creature that walked in was unlike anything most humans had ever seen. It stood 7 feet tall, with dark green scales that seemed to shift color in the light. Its eyes were yellow with black slits like a snake, and when it moved, it made no sound at all. The being wore what looked like a military uniform, but it was made of materials that seemed to glow with their own light. Behind the tall creature came 6 more beings, all wearing similar uniforms. They arranged themselves in a perfect line at the front of the assembly hall. The tall one stepped forward and spoke in a voice that was both loud and cold. "I am Ambassador Vextar of the Zephyrian Empire," the creature said. Its voice came through, speakers around the room, translated into dozens of languages at once. "I speak for Emperor Zethkol, ruler of 300 star systems and master of 47 conquered species." The assembly hall became completely quiet. President Carter put down her phone and sat up straight. General Kevin Walsh, who had been half asleep in his chair, suddenly became very alert. Ambassador Vextar continued speaking. "Humans of the planet you call Earth, you have been judged by the Empire. Your species has spread beyond your home world. You have begun to explore space. This expansion ends now." The ambassador paused and looked around the room. His yellow eyes seemed to examine each person individually. "The Zephyrian Empire has decided that your species will serve the Empire as workers. You will be relocated to agricultural worlds where you will tend to livestock and grow food for your betters." Murmurs started throughout the assembly hall. People began whispering to each other. But the ambassador raised one clawed hand and the room fell silent again. "You have 30 of your planetary rotations to surrender completely and without conditions," Vextar announced. "Your military forces will be disbanded. Your weapons will be destroyed. Your leaders will be replaced by Empire administrators. Any resistance will be met with the complete destruction of your cities." The ambassador's scales seemed to shimmer more brightly as he continued. "Do not mistake this for a negotiation. This is not a request. This is a statement of fact. The Zephyrian Empire has conquered civilizations that existed for thousands of years before your species learned to create fire. We have destroyed planets. We have relocated entire populations across the galaxy." President Carter stood up slowly. "Ambassador, may I ask a question?" Vextar turned his head toward her. "You may speak, human leader." "What happens if we refuse?" Carter asked. The ambassador's mouth opened slightly, showing rows of sharp teeth. "Then your species will be eliminated. Your planet will be stripped of its resources. Your cities will become dust. Your history will be forgotten." That was when something unexpected happened. General Walsh, a man who had fought in 3 wars and seen combat on 4 continents, started to chuckle. It was a quiet sound at first, almost like he was clearing his throat, but then it grew louder. Secretary Martinez looked at the general with confusion. "Kevin, what's so funny?" Walsh tried to control himself, but the chuckling became full laughter. He leaned back in his chair and laughed so hard that tears came to his eyes. "I'm sorry," he said between laughs. "I'm really sorry. It's just, did he just threaten to turn us into space farmers?" The laughter was catching. Secretary Thompson started smiling, then laughing quietly. Soon President Carter was trying not to laugh herself. Within minutes, the entire human delegation was laughing. Some people were laughing so hard they had to wipe tears from their eyes. Ambassador Vextar looked around the room with growing confusion. His translator device made strange beeping sounds, as if it was having trouble processing what it was hearing. "I do not understand this reaction," he said. "This is not amusing. This is a declaration of war." President Carter took a deep breath and tried to stop laughing. "Oh, we understand perfectly, Ambassador. You want us to surrender in 30 days? And become farmers for your empire." She looked around at her colleagues, many of whom were still grinning. "It's just that... Well, have you done any research on human behavior?" "Research?" Vextar asked. "Yes, research. Have you studied how humans react to threats? Have you looked at our history? Have you seen what we do when someone tells us we can't do something?" Carter asked. The ambassador's scales shifted color slightly. "Your species is primitive. Your technology is basic. Your military forces are small and weak. What could you possibly do against the might of the Empire?" General Walsh wiped his eyes and stood up. "Ambassador, let me ask you something. In all your research about humans, did you ever come across the term Florida man?" The confusion on the ambassador's face was clear even to humans who had never seen his species before. "Florida man? What is this Florida man?" "Oh, Florida man isn't a person," Walsh explained. Well, it's hard to explain. It's what happens when humans get really creative with bad decisions." Secretary Martinez joined the conversation. "Ambassador, did your research include anything about humans who tried to rob banks with bananas? Or people who called the police to report that someone stole their illegal drugs? Or the guy who tried to pay for his McDonald's meal with a bag of lizards?" Vextar's translator device was making more beeping sounds. "I do not understand these references." President Carter smiled. "That's exactly the problem, Ambassador. You've conquered 47 species, but I'm guessing they were all normal logical species. Species that followed predictable patterns. Species that did sensible things when threatened." "Of course," Vextar replied. "All intelligent species behave logically when faced with superior force." The human delegation burst into laughter again. This time, even the translators and security guards were chuckling. "Ambassador," Carter said, "I think there's been a fundamental misunderstanding. You've assumed that humans are a normal, logical species, but we're not. We're the species that invented extreme sports for fun. We're the species that will eat food so spicy it causes physical pain just to prove we can. We're the species that will spend enormous amounts of money to jump out of perfectly good airplanes." She walked closer to the ambassador. "We're the species that, when told we can't do something, will do it anyway just to see what happens. We're the species that turned Florida into... well, Florida." Vextar was now looking decidedly uncomfortable. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that your empire has just declared war on the only species in the galaxy that considers hold my beer and watch this to be a valid military strategy," Carter replied. General Walsh stepped forward. "Ambassador, I want you to go back to your emperor and tell him something for me. Tell him that Earth accepts his declaration of war. Tell him that we'll be ready for him in 30 days. And tell him that we're going to respond in the most human way possible." "What does that mean?" Vextar asked. Walsh grinned. "It means we're going to do something so completely ridiculous that your empire won't know how to handle it. It means we're going to show you what happens when you threaten a species that thinks creative problem-solving includes duct tape, explosives, and really bad ideas." President Carter nodded. "Ambassador, you've just made the biggest mistake in your empire's history. You've declared war on humans. And humans don't just fight wars. We turn wars into something else entirely." The ambassador and his delegation left the assembly hall looking confused and slightly worried. As soon as they were gone, the real work began. 3 days after the alien declaration, the world had changed completely. Every news channel on Earth was talking about the Zephyrian Empire and their 30-day deadline. Some people were panicking, others were angry. But in secret government facilities around the world, something very different was happening. Deep underground in a military base in Colorado, Dr. Amy Chen was working on the strangest project of her career. She had been a professor of sociology at Harvard University just 1 week ago. Now she was sitting in a room with no windows, surrounded by computers and stacks of papers, leading something called the Cultural Warfare Division. "Okay, people," she said to her team of 20 researchers. "Our job is simple. We need to find the most ridiculous, absurd, and completely insane things that humans have ever done. And then we need to figure out how to use them as weapons. Her assistant, Dr. Rick Barnes, looked up from his computer. I've been going through Florida police reports from the last 5 years. There's a man who tried to train alligators to deliver pizza, another guy who got arrested for trying to teach squirrels how to water ski, and someone who built a rocket-powered shopping cart and crashed it into a Walmart. Perfect, Amy said. Put all of those in the file marked Tactical Inspiration. What else do we have? Dr. Sarah Miller raised her hand. I've been looking at Australian news stories. There's a guy who tried to surf on a crocodile, a woman who entered a kangaroo boxing match, and an entire town that had a competition to see who could make the loudest noise using only kitchen utensils. Excellent. What about Russia? Oh, the Russians are gold, said Dr. Peter Johnson, grinning. Dashboard camera footage shows people doing things that shouldn't be physically possible. There's a man who used a bear as a co-pilot while driving. Another guy who tried to stop a speeding car by standing in front of it and flexing his muscles. And someone who built a swimming pool in the back of a pickup truck and drove it through Moscow during rush hour. Amy nodded and made notes. This is exactly what we need. The aliens expect us to behave logically. They expect us to either surrender or fight a normal war. They have no idea how to handle humans who use chaos as a strategy. Meanwhile, in another part of the same facility, Captain Steve Johnson was running a very different kind of operation. He had been put in charge of something called media coordination, which sounded boring but was actually the most important job in the building. Steve was on the phone with news networks around the world. I need every reporter you have to start collecting the weirdest human interest stories they can find, he told a producer at CNN. I don't care how stupid it sounds. If it makes you shake your head and wonder why humans exist, I want it. But Captain, the producer said, these stories aren't news. They're just random weird things that people do. That's exactly the point, Steve replied. The aliens think they know what humans are capable of. They studied our military. They looked at our technology. They analyzed our governments. But they never looked at the guy who tried to rob a bank with a banana, or the woman who married her pet snake, or the man who built a house entirely out of beer cans. The producer was quiet for a moment. You want us to make a database of human stupidity? I want you to make a database of human creativity, Steve corrected, because what looks like stupidity to us is going to look like advanced psychological warfare to aliens who don't understand how human minds work. On the other side of the country, in a training facility in Nevada, something even stranger was happening. Marine Colonel Lisa Brown was running the most unusual military exercise in human history. Listen up, Marines, she shouted to a group of 50 soldiers standing in formation. For the next 4 weeks, you're going to learn a new kind of combat. We're calling it tactical absurdity. One of the Marines raised his hand. Ma'am, what exactly is tactical absurdity? It's fighting a war in a way that's so ridiculous that the enemy can't figure out how to respond, Lisa explained. The aliens have studied every military strategy in human history. They know how we normally fight wars. So we're not going to fight normally. She walked over to a table covered with strange objects. Your new weapons include rubber chickens, pool noodles, water balloons, whoopee cushions, and foam fingers. Your new uniforms will include clown shoes, funny hats, and costumes that make you look like giant vegetables. The Marines looked at each other with confusion and concern. Ma'am, another Marine said carefully, are we going to fight aliens with pool noodles? You're going to fight aliens with psychological warfare that they can't understand, Lisa replied. When they see you coming at them with foam swords while wearing a banana costume and shouting show tunes, their brains are going to stop working. They won't know if you're attacking, performing, or having a mental breakdown. She picked up a rubber chicken. This isn't just a toy. This is a weapon that attacks the enemy's expectations. When they see it, they'll spend so much time trying to figure out what it does that they won't notice the real attack coming from somewhere else. Back in Colorado, the Cultural Warfare Division was making progress. Amy had divided her team into different groups, each focusing on a different type of human weirdness. Group 1 is working on sports absurdity, she announced during their daily meeting. They're studying people who invented ridiculous competitions, like competitive dog grooming, extreme ironing, and toe wrestling championships. Dr. Barnes looked up from his notes. We found a sport where people chase a wheel of cheese down a hill, another one where teams of people carry their wives through obstacle courses, and something called bog snorkeling, where people swim through muddy water while wearing flippers and masks. Group 2 is working on food weirdness, Amy continued. They're looking at humans who eat things that shouldn't be food, or eat normal food in crazy ways. Dr. Miller nodded. We have eating contests where people consume enormous amounts of hot dogs, pizzas, and ice cream. There are people who eat ghost peppers for fun. Someone invented deep-fried butter, and there's a restaurant that serves food so spicy that customers have to sign legal documents before they can order it. Group 3 is studying transportation creativity, Amy said. Dr. Johnson grinned. Humans will turn anything into a vehicle. We found people racing on riding lawnmowers, boats made out of cardboard, cars powered by jet engines, and someone who built a motorcycle that looks like a giant hamburger. The work continued day and night. In facilities around the world, humans were preparing for war in the most human way possible. They weren't building bigger weapons or training harder soldiers. They were preparing to be so weird that their enemies wouldn't know how to handle them. In Washington, D.C., a new government department had been created almost overnight. The Department of Ridiculous Operations was housed in a building that used to be a shopping mall. General Carl Stevens, who had been chosen to lead the department, walked through the halls looking at the strangest military preparation in history. In one room, circus performers were working with Navy SEALs to develop combat techniques involving juggling and acrobatics. In another room, professional wrestlers were teaching Army Rangers how to perform dramatic entrances and give intimidating speeches while wearing colorful masks. "Sir," his assistant said, "the Hollywood liaison team has arrived." General Stevens walked into a conference room where movie directors, special effects experts, and stunt performers were meeting with military strategists. They were designing ways to make human military operations look like elaborate entertainment productions. "The idea," explained Director Tom Wilson, "is to make everything we do look so much like a movie or a TV show that the aliens won't be able to tell if we're actually fighting or just performing. We can make our spaceships look like they belong in a science fiction comedy," added Special Effects Supervisor Janet Lee. "We can make our uniforms look like costumes. We can make our battles look like elaborate performances." The military strategist, Colonel Dan Martinez, nodded. "The aliens have probably studied human warfare, but have they studied human entertainment? Do they understand the difference between a real battle and a staged performance?" "That's the beauty of it," Tom replied. "They won't know if we're trying to kill them or trying to make them laugh." At the same time, Admiral Karen Foster was receiving the strangest orders of her 30-year military career. She was standing in the Pentagon looking at documents that she had to read 3 times before she believed them. "Sir," she said to General Walsh, "you want me to repaint the entire space fleet bright pink?" "That's correct, Admiral." "And rename all the ships after boy bands?" "Also correct." "And install sound systems that can broadcast music loud enough to be heard in space?" "You're getting the idea." Admiral Foster sat down heavily in her chair. "General, with respect, this sounds insane." General Walsh smiled. "Admiral, that's exactly the point. The aliens are expecting us to behave like every other species they've conquered. They're expecting logical military responses. They're expecting us to try to negotiate or fight conventionally." He walked over to a window and looked out at the city. "But we're not every other species. We're humans. We're the species that invented reality TV, professional wrestling, and competitive eating." 30 days after the alien ultimatum, the Zephyrian war fleet arrived at the edge of Earth's solar system. 3,000 massive ships moved through space in perfect formation, just as they had done during 47 previous conquests. Each ship was built for intimidation, with dark metal hulls covered in weapon ports and armor plating that could survive planetary bombardment. On the flagship, Warlord Kethrak stood on the command bridge and looked at the blue planet through the main view screen. He was a veteran of 23 military campaigns and had never lost a battle. His scales were scarred from combat, and his yellow eyes had seen the surrender of dozens of alien species. Commander, he said to his second-in-command, begin scanning for human military vessels. I want to know their positions and weapon capabilities. Before we begin the attack, Commander Yethlock operated the scanning equipment. Sir, I'm detecting human ships approaching from the direction of their planet. They appear to be moving in formation. How many ships? Kethrak asked. Approximately 50 vessels, sir. Much smaller than expected. Kethrak nodded. Typical. The humans are making a token resistance before they surrender. Display their ships on the main screen. What appeared on the view screen made every Zephyrian on the bridge stop what they were doing and stare in confusion. The human ships were bright pink, not just pink, but the most aggressive shade of hot pink that anyone had ever seen. They sparkled, with glitter that caught the light from the nearby star. Each ship had writing on the side in enormous colorful letters. Sir, Yethlock said slowly, the human ships have unusual markings. The lead vessel appears to be named USS Backstreet's Back. Kethrak blinked his reptilian eyes. Backstreet's Back, what does that mean? Unknown, sir. The other ships have similar names. USS NSYNC Forever, USS One Direction, USS Boy Band Revenge. Are these names supposed to be intimidating? Kethrak asked. Before anyone could answer, the communication system activated. A human voice filled the bridge, but it sounded strange. The voice was artificially modified to sound like it was singing instead of talking. This is Captain Tony Russo of the Terran Defense Force, the voice sang in an upbeat rhythm. We have received your declaration of war, and we formally accept your challenge to combat. However, as per Earth combat regulations established 30 minutes ago, all battles must be conducted according to human cultural standards. Kethrak looked at his communications officer. Human cultural standards? What does that mean? The officer, a young Zephyrian named Rextar, was frantically checking the translation systems. Sir, I don't know. Our databases have no information about human combat culture. The human voice continued singing. According to Earth Military Code Section 1, Subsection A, Paragraph 1, all space battles must begin with a dance-off between opposing fleets to determine who has the superior rhythm and coordination. Dance-off? Kethrak repeated. What is a dance-off? On the view screen, the human ships began to move in a way that made no military sense. They started flying in synchronized patterns, spinning and looping around each other like they were performing some kind of aerial ballet. At the same time, music began broadcasting from their ships at volume so loud that it registered on the Zephyrians' seismic equipment. The song was called Everybody Dance Now, and it was being played at a volume that could be heard across several light years, sir, the weapons officer said. Should we open fire? Kethrak watched as the human ships continued their bizarre performance. Hold fire. I want to understand what they're doing before we destroy them. The human fleet had arranged itself into formation and was performing what appeared to be a carefully choreographed routine. Ships were flying in perfect synchronization, creating patterns in space while firing what the Zephyrian sensors identified as confetti cannons. They're shooting colorful paper at us, Rextar reported. Sir, I don't understand what's happening. Captain Tony Russo's voice came over the communications again. Attention Zephyrian fleet. You have witnessed the opening move of the Terran Dance Battle Protocol. According to the rules, you now have 10 minutes to respond with your own dance routine. Failure to participate will result in automatic forfeit of the engagement. Kethrak turned to his tactical officer. Is this some kind of human military strategy that we don't understand? Sir, our computers can't classify this as any known form of warfare. The humans appear to be performing for entertainment purposes, but they called it a battle protocol, Kethrak said. Are they treating warfare as entertainment? Before anyone could answer, the human ships changed formation again. This time they arranged themselves to spell out words in space. The words said your turn to dance in letters that were 3 miles tall. The music changed to something called Baby Shark, and the volume increased even more. Several Zephyrian crew members had to leave the bridge because the song was giving them headaches. Sir, Yethlock said, I'm receiving reports from other ships in our fleet. The crews are becoming agitated by the music. Agitated how? The Song appears to be designed to repeat the same lyrics over and over again. Our psychology experts say it's having an adverse effect on crew morale. On the view screen, the human ships were now performing what could only be described as breakdancing in space. They were spinning on multiple axes while maintaining perfect formation and continuing to broadcast children's songs at weaponized volumes. Captain Russo's voice returned, still singing instead of speaking normally. Zephyrian Fleet, you have 5 minutes remaining to begin your dance routine. We recommend starting with something simple like the electric slide or the Macarena. What is the electric slide? Kethrak asked. What is the Macarena? Unknown, sir, Rextar replied. But the humans seem to expect us to know these things. The warlord was beginning to feel something he had never experienced in 23 military campaigns: complete bewilderment. His species had developed tactics for every conceivable form of warfare. They had strategies for space battles, ground assaults, psychological attacks, and siege warfare. But nobody had ever prepared him for an enemy that treated combat like a musical performance. Sir, the communications officer said, I'm receiving a transmission from the human flagship. They're sending us something called an instruction video to help us learn the basic dance moves. Put it on the screen, Kethrak ordered. What appeared on the view screen was a video of humans performing various dance moves while upbeat music played in the background. The humans were wearing colorful clothing and smiling while they moved their bodies in rhythmic patterns. They appear to be demonstrating coordinated physical movements, the tactical officer observed. But I don't understand the military purpose. There is no military purpose, Kethrak said slowly. They're treating this battle like some form of recreational activity. The video continued, showing different dance moves. There were humans doing something called the robot, others performing the moonwalk, and a group doing something that involved jumping and clapping while shouting, Hey! Sir, Yethlok said, time is running out. The humans say we have 2 minutes to begin our dance routine or we forfeit the battle. Kethrak looked around his bridge at his crew. These were hardened warriors who had conquered star systems. They were trained killers who followed orders without question. The idea of asking them to perform recreational dancing was beyond absurd. Sir, Rextar said quietly, what if this is some form of advanced psychological warfare? What if the humans are trying to confuse us so they can launch a surprise attack? That's possible, Kethrak admitted. But if we refuse to participate, they might claim victory according to their cultural rules. The human voice came over the communications one more time. 30 seconds remaining, Zephyrian Fleet. We understand this might be your first dance battle, so we'll accept any basic moves. Even simple swaying would count as participation. Swaying? Kethrak asked. It means moving back and forth rhythmically, the computer translator explained. The warlord faced an impossible decision. He could order his fleet to attack, but the humans might claim that he had broken their cultural combat rules. He could try to participate in their bizarre ritual, but that would mean asking his warriors to dance in space. He could try to negotiate, but the humans seemed committed to treating this as some form of entertainment competition. Sir, the weapons officer said, orders? Kethrak looked at the human ships, which were now performing something that involved flying in figure-8 patterns while playing a song about someone named Mambo No. 5. The crews on several of his ships were reporting that the music was causing what human psychologists would recognize as earworm syndrome, the inability to stop thinking about an annoying song. Open a communication channel to the human flagship, he ordered. Captain Russo answered immediately, still using his singing voice. Zephyrian Warlord, are you ready to show us your moves? Human Captain, Kethrak said, I need to understand. Is this how your species conducts warfare? Oh no, Russo replied cheerfully. This is how we conduct dance battles. The warfare comes later, after we determine who has the better rhythm. And if we refuse to participate? News of the space dance battle spread across the galaxy faster than anyone expected. Within hours of the first encounter, alien species throughout the known universe were watching recordings of human ships performing synchronized maneuvers while playing something called Gangnam Style at volumes that could be heard on nearby moons. The reaction was immediate and unprecedented. For the first time in galactic history, an entire empire was being laughed at by every other species in the galaxy. On the water world of Aquatica Prime, the fish-like Atlanteans held an emergency council meeting. Elder Glooblob spoke for the entire population when he said, "The Zephyrians have been defeated by choreography. This changes everything." Similar conversations were happening on hundreds of worlds. The Zephyrian Empire, built on fear and military superiority, suddenly found themselves the subject of galactic comedy shows. Late-night talk show hosts across the galaxy were making jokes about reptiles trying to learn the electric slide. But the humans weren't finished. While the space dance battle had confused the main Zephyrian fleet, other human operations were beginning on planets throughout the Empire. On the mining world of Keth Prime, something was happening that the local Zephyrian garrison couldn't understand. Their security systems detected intruders, but when the guards investigated, they found something that made no sense. Captain Jennifer Lopez, a former circus performer who had joined the military specifically for this mission, was leading a team of 12 humans through the main military complex. But they weren't sneaking or fighting. They were walking through the halls openly, wearing full military gear combined with red noses, rainbow wigs, and oversized shoes. "Sir," a Zephyrian guard reported to his commander, "there are humans in the building, but they appear to be entertainers of some kind." "Entertainers?" Commander Zektor asked. "They're carrying weapons, but they're also carrying balloons and making squeaking noises with their shoes." The commander activated the security cameras and watched as the human team moved through his facility. They were clearly soldiers, their movements were precise and professional. But they were also honking bicycle horns, juggling rubber balls, and leaving a trail of colorful handprints on the walls. "What are they doing?" he asked. His question was answered when the humans reached the main armory. Instead of stealing weapons or planting explosives, they began replacing all of the Zephyrian military equipment with toys. Laser rifles became water guns. Plasma grenades became whoopee cushions. Battle armor became inflatable costumes that looked like various Earth animals. Each item was carefully labeled with a business card that read, "Earth's premier intergalactic prank service. We put the fun in fundamental military restructuring," by Sue. The time the Zephyrian guards realized what was happening, it was too late. When they tried to arm themselves for a counterattack, they found themselves holding rubber mallets and squirt guns. "Commander," one guard reported, "my weapon has been replaced with something called a banana of doom. It appears to be an actual banana with a small flag attached that says boom." Similar operations were happening on dozens of Zephyrian worlds. The humans had somehow managed to infiltrate military bases, government buildings, and communication centers across the Empire. But instead of causing destruction, they were causing confusion on a massive scale. On the fortress world of Grimmer, Lieutenant Commander Bob Taylor was conducting the most unusual military operation in human history. Bob had been a professional wrestler before the war, known for his dramatic entrances and theatrical combat style. He stood outside the planetary governor's palace, wearing full battle armor decorated with sequins and feathers. In his hands, he held a microphone connected to speakers so powerful that his voice could be heard across the entire planet. "Governor Sekthul of Grimmer," Bob announced in his best wrestling announcer voice. "I, Lieutenant Commander Bob, the Human Hurricane Taylor, challenge you to single combat for control of this world." The message was broadcast on every communication channel on the planet. Governor Sekthul, a massive Zephyrian warrior with enough scars to prove his combat experience, watched from his palace balcony as crowds of local aliens gathered to see what would happen. "The terms are simple," Bob continued. "One-on-one combat. Winner takes control of the planet. Loser has to wear a bright pink tutu and perform the Macarena in front of their entire army." The governor's military advisors told him to ignore the challenge. "Sir, this is obviously some kind of human psychological attack. Don't respond." But Governor Sekthul was a warrior. His honor demanded that he accept any challenge to single combat. "I accept," he announced. "But we fight with traditional weapons, according to Zephyrian combat rules." "Absolutely," Bob replied. "Zephyrian combat rules. Traditional weapons, best 2 out of 3 falls. And just to make it interesting, the whole thing gets broadcast live across the galaxy. The wrestling match that followed became the most watched sporting event in galactic history. Governor Sek Thul was a skilled fighter with 300 years of combat experience. Bob Taylor was a human who had spent most of his career pretending to fight other humans for entertainment. But Bob had something the governor didn't understand. He knew how to make fighting look like performance art. Every move was dramatic. Every attack came with theatrical dialogue. Every moment was designed for maximum entertainment value. And now, Bob shouted while dodging the governor's attack, "I'm going to show you the devastating power of the flying human pancake slam." The move was completely made up, but Bob performed it with such theatrical flair that the crowd cheered. When Governor Sek Thul tried to respond with a traditional Zephyrian combat technique, Bob turned it into what looked like an elaborate dance routine. The match lasted 3 hours. By the end, Governor Sek Thul had technically won 2 falls out of 3, but the entire galaxy was talking about the human who had turned a death match into the most entertaining show anyone had ever seen. And according to the terms of the challenge, the governor still had to wear the pink tutu and perform the Macarena, because Bob claimed that entertainment value was part of the traditional Zephyrian honor code. The video of a massive reptilian warrior doing the Macarena while wearing a tutu was viewed by every species in the galaxy within 6 hours. Meanwhile, on other worlds, different human teams were conducting different types of operations. Sergeant Mary Johnson was leading a psychological operations team that had replaced all of the Zephyrian Empire's propaganda broadcasts with Earth's most ridiculous television shows. Zephyrian citizens who expected to see news about the glorious Empire instead found themselves watching humans voluntarily eating insects for money, getting married to complete strangers, and competing in contests that involved wearing costumes while answering trivia questions. The effect on Zephyrian morale was devastating. Soldiers who had been trained to believe in the superiority of their civilization were watching humans do things that were so absurd that they questioned the nature of intelligence itself. "Sir," a Zephyrian psychologist reported to his commanding officer, "our troops are requesting counseling sessions. They say the human television programs have given them what they're calling existential crisis syndrome." What exactly did they see? A show where humans compete to see who can eat the most hot dogs in 10 minutes. Another show where humans live in a house together and vote each other out while cameras record everything they do. And something called Jackass, where humans voluntarily hurt themselves for entertainment purposes. The commanding officer looked at the report. "Are you telling me that our soldiers are having mental breakdowns because they watched humans eat hot dogs?" "Sir, it's not just the hot dogs. It's the entire concept. These humans appear to create artificial challenges for recreational purposes. They voluntarily participate in activities that serve no survival function and provide no strategic advantage. Our soldiers can't understand why an intelligent species would do these things." This was happening across the Empire. Zephyrian military units were being exposed to human culture and finding that their understanding of intelligent behavior was being challenged in ways they couldn't handle. The humans had discovered something that no other species had ever realized. The Zephyrians were extremely logical. Their entire civilization was based on rational thinking and practical decision-making. When confronted with beings who appeared to make decisions based on entertainment value rather than logic, their minds couldn't process it. Dr. Amy Chen, monitoring the operations from her bunker in Colorado, was amazed at how well the plan was working. "The aliens are having nervous breakdowns," she reported to General Walsh. "Not because we're attacking them, but because they can't understand why we do the things we do." "What's our next move?" the general asked. "We escalate," Amy replied. "We show them the really weird stuff." The next phase of operations involved releasing what the humans called Florida Man, the documentary series, to every screen on every Zephyrian world. The series included true stories of humans who had done things so bizarre that even other humans couldn't explain them. There was the man who tried to train alligators to deliver pizza, the woman who married her pet rock, the guy who built a house out of beer cans and tried to sail it to Cuba. 2 weeks after the space dance battle, the Zephyrian Empire was falling apart. Reports were coming in from across the galaxy about Zephyrian soldiers abandoning their posts, not because they were afraid, but because they were too confused to function. On the capital world of Zephyros Prime, Emperor Zethkol sat in his throne room trying to understand how his mighty empire was being destroyed by a species that seemed to treat everything like a game. His military advisors stood around him, but none of them had any useful advice. "Your Imperial Magnificence," General Vokhtar reported, "we have lost contact with 70% of our occupied worlds. The remaining garrisons are requesting psychological support to deal with what they call human confusion syndrome." "What exactly is human confusion syndrome?" the Emperor asked. "Sir, it appears to be a condition where our soldiers become unable to perform their duties because they cannot understand human behavior. They spend all their time trying to figure out why humans do things that serve no logical purpose." The Emperor rubbed his scaled forehead. "Give me an example." "Well, sir, on Kepler Station, our entire garrison is currently standing in formation trying to understand why humans created a sport where they hit a small ball with a stick and then run in a circle. They have been standing there for 3 days." 3 days? "Yes, sir. They refuse to do anything else until they understand the strategic purpose of baseball." Before the Emperor could respond, his communications officer announced an incoming message. "Sir, we have a transmission from the human homeworld. It's marked as urgent diplomatic communication." "Put it through," the Emperor ordered. The main screen activated, showing something that made every Zephyrian in the throne room stop and stare. A middle-aged human woman was sitting in what appeared to be the pilot seat of a spacecraft. But the spacecraft looked like a giant yellow rubber duck, complete with a bill and painted-on eyes. "Greetings, Emperor Zethkol," the woman said with a friendly smile. "I'm President Helen Carter of Earth. I'm calling to discuss the terms of our surrender." The Emperor leaned forward on his throne. Finally, the humans were being reasonable. "President Carter, I accept your surrender. Prepare your planet for occupation." "Oh, there's been a small misunderstanding," Carter said, still smiling. "We're not surrendering to you. You're surrendering to us." "What?" the Emperor said. "That makes no sense. We have the superior military force." "That's true," Carter agreed. "But according to galactic law, specifically the Treaty of Reasonable Behavior signed by 47 species, any civilization that cannot maintain military discipline during a conflict automatically forfeits the war." General Vokhtar stepped forward. "Sir, there is no Treaty of Reasonable Behavior." Carter held up a document. "Actually, there is now. We wrote it yesterday and got it signed by every species in the galaxy. Apparently everyone thought it was hilarious and wanted to be part of it." The Emperor's translator device was making confused beeping sounds. "You cannot write a treaty and have it apply retroactively to a war that already started." "Normally, you'd be right," Carter said. "But this is a special case. You see, your empire has been conquered not through military defeat, but through cultural victory. According to Article 15 of the treaty, any species that causes their enemies to abandon military discipline through sheer bewilderment has won the war." "This is absurd," the Emperor said. "Yes, it is," Carter agreed cheerfully. "That's exactly the point. Your species operates on logic and military tradition. Our species operates on chaos and creative problem-solving. When you declared war on us, you created a situation where chaos beats logic." She gestured to someone off-screen, and the camera angle widened to show that President Carter was not alone. The giant rubber duck spacecraft was apparently quite large inside, because it was filled with humans wearing costumes that looked like various Earth animals. "Now, according to the surrender ceremony that we've prepared for you, there are certain traditions that must be followed," Carter continued. "What traditions?" the Emperor asked suspiciously. "Well, first, you and your entire military leadership need to participate in what we call the victory dance of peaceful understanding." "What is that?" "It's a traditional human celebration where everyone dances together to show that the war is over and we can all be friends. The dance is performed while wearing ceremonial Earth garments." "What kind of garments?" Carter smiled and held up what appeared to be an inflatable costume shaped like a large dinosaur. "These are traditional human peace costumes. They represent the ancient Earth spirit of friendly cooperation." The Emperor stared at the costume. "You want me to wear that?" "It's either that or we continue the war," Carter said. And I have to warn you, if the war continues, our next operation is something we call the Great Pie Fight of Galactic Harmony. It involves launching edible desserts at all of your remaining military installations. General Vokhtar whispered to the Emperor, "Sir, we cannot handle another human operation. Our troops are already at the breaking point." The Emperor looked around his throne room at his advisors. These were beings who had conquered star systems and defeated entire civilizations. Now they were being asked to surrender to a species that wanted them to wear inflatable dinosaur costumes. "If I agree to this ceremony," the Emperor said slowly, "what happens to my empire?" "Oh, your empire will be fine," Carter replied. "In fact, it'll be better than fine. We're going to transform it into the Galactic Republic of reasonable beings who learned not to take themselves too seriously." "What does that mean?" "It means your people will learn to have fun. We're going to teach every species in your former empire how to play games, tell jokes, and do things just because they're entertaining. We're going to show them that life doesn't always have to be serious and logical." The Emperor considered this. His empire was already collapsing. His soldiers were having mental breakdowns because they couldn't understand human behavior. His enemies were laughing at him across the galaxy. "And if I refuse?" he asked. "Then we release Phase 2 of our cultural warfare program," Carter said. "It's called Florida Man, the Galactic Tour. We'll send teams of our most creative humans to every world in your empire to demonstrate advanced human recreational activities." "What kind of recreational activities?" "Well, there's competitive furniture moving, artistic food fighting, recreational vehicle modification using household items, and interpretive dance performances about the meaning of everyday objects." The Emperor's military advisors were now whispering urgently among themselves. They had read the reports about human recreational activities. The idea of Florida Man teams operating throughout their empire was more terrifying than any conventional military assault. "Sir," General Vokhtar said quietly, "I recommend surrender. Our forces cannot handle more exposure to human culture." The Emperor closed his eyes and made the most difficult decision of his long reign. "I accept your terms, President Carter. Where do you want to hold this surrender ceremony?" "Right here on your throne world," Carter said happily. "We'll land in your capital city in about 2 hours. Please have your entire military leadership ready to participate. Oh, and make sure to clear a large public space. The victory dance requires room for everyone to move around." 2 hours later, the most unusual surrender ceremony in galactic history took place in the main square of Zephyros Prime. Millions of Zephyrian citizens gathered to watch as their emperor and his entire military command performed what humans call the chicken dance while wearing inflatable dinosaur costumes. The ceremony was broadcast live across the galaxy. Every species in known space watched as the mighty Zephyrian Empire officially surrendered by dancing to Earth music while dressed as cartoon animals. President Carter, wearing a costume that made her look like a giant penguin, led the dance while a marching band of humans played "We Are the Champions" at maximum volume. But the most remarkable thing about the ceremony was what happened afterward. As the Zephyrian leaders continued dancing, something unexpected occurred. They started to smile. Then they started to laugh. Emperor Zethkol, who had ruled through fear and military might for 3 centuries, found himself genuinely enjoying the ridiculous dance. For the first time in his life, he was doing something that served no strategic purpose and provided no military advantage. He was just having fun. The change spread through the crowd. Zephyrian citizens who had lived their entire lives under strict military rule began joining the dance. Soon, the entire capital city was dancing to human music while wearing whatever costumes they could find. Within 6 months, the transformation was complete. The former Zephyrian Empire had become the Galactic Republic of reasonable beings who learned not to take themselves too seriously. Every world in the former empire had established recreational centers where citizens could learn human-style games and activities. Emperor Zethkol abdicated his throne and moved to Earth, where he became a surprisingly successful comedian. His specialty was self-deprecating humor about former galactic overlords who learned to appreciate the simple joy of wearing funny costumes. The war ended with humanity achieving the most ridiculous victory in military history,